I found her. Hidden. You read something like that and your first instinct is to question it, to tell yourself there has to be more to the story, that things like that don't just happen in real life. Not in ordinary families, not in quiet offices, not between people who once promised to trust each other. But the truth is far more unsettling than that, because when something like this does happen, it doesn't arrive with warning signs or dramatic music. It hides itself in normal days, polite conversations, familiar places. It waits until your guard is completely down. And that's the part no one prepares you for. Because when a child goes missing, your mind doesn't go to the person you share your life with, it goes everywhere else first. It goes to strangers, to worst-case scenarios, to the outside world. Because believing the danger could be inside your own home, or worse, carefully hidden within your everyday life, is something most people simply refuse to accept. So let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself here. Have you ever been so certain about someone that you stopped questioning them completely? Have you ever defended someone without even realizing you were ignoring things that didn't quite add up? And if one day, everything you believed about that person started to crack, would you even notice it in time? Or would you do what most of us do, look away, justify it, tell yourself you're overthinking, until it's too late? Because I used to think I was different. I used to believe I had an eye for things like that I could sense when something was off, when someone wasn't telling the whole truth. I told myself that after years of listening to people, observing behavior, weighing words against silence, I had learned how to see what others missed. That belief stayed with me long after I stepped away from the courtroom, long after I left behind the life where decisions carried consequences most people never have to face. My name is Whitmore. Judge Whitmore, at least that's what people used to call me. Retirement has a way of stripping titles down to memories, but habits, those stay with you. The habit of noticing, of analyzing, of questioning. I thought those were still sharp. I thought I hadn't lost that edge. But what I didn't realize was that the one place I had stopped questioning was the place I trusted the most. That afternoon was supposed to be simple. There was nothing unusual about it, nothing that would stand out if you looked at it from the outside. I remember the drive being quiet, almost too quiet now that I think about it, like one of those moments life gives you before something changes, though you don't recognize it at the time. I hadn't told her I was coming. That was the point. A small surprise, something spontaneous. It had been a while since we'd done anything like that, and I suppose I convinced myself that was reason enough. No suspicion, no hidden motive, just a husband stopping by his wife's office in the middle of the day. Normal. Completely normal. And yet, if there's one thing I've learned since then, it's that normal can be the most deceptive thing of all. When I walked into that building, nothing felt out of place. The front desk was exactly as you'd expect. Organized, quiet, professional. The kind of place where everything appears controlled, predictable. People glanced up briefly, acknowledged me, then returned to whatever they were doing. No alarm, no tension, at least not the kind you notice immediately. And that's the problem with subtle things, they don't announce themselves. They sit just beneath the surface, waiting for you to either notice them or walk right past them. I remember giving her name at the desk, expecting the usual response. Maybe a smile, maybe a quick call to let her know I was there. But instead there was this pause. Just a fraction of a second. So small most people wouldn't even register it. But I did. Or at least, part of me did. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. The receptionist smiled, polite as expected, but her eyes didn't quite match it. There was a hesitation, like she was choosing her words more carefully than necessary. She's a bit busy right now, she told me. And on its own, that sentence meant nothing. People are busy all the time. Offices run on busy schedules. But something about the way it was delivered, the slight delay, the subtle shift in tone, it lingered longer than it should have. Still, I brushed it off. That's what we do, isn't it? We explain things away. We choose the version of reality that's easier to accept. I told her I didn't mind waiting. It wasn't unusual. In fact, it gave me time to sit, to look around, to exist in that space without rushing. She gestured toward a seating area near the desk, and I thanked her, taking a seat that faced part of the office floor. From there, everything seemed ordinary. People moving, quiet conversations, the distant sound of phones ringing. If there was anything wrong, it was buried well beneath the surface. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt almost foolish for even noticing that earlier pause. But here's the thing about instincts, they don't disappear just because you ignore them. They wait. They linger. And sometimes they come back in ways you don't expect. I remember sitting there, letting my eyes wander, taking in details without really focusing on any one thing. A habit, I suppose. Something you carry with you after years of observing people, environments, patterns. And at first, nothing stood out. Just an office like any other. Controlled. Predictable. Safe. Safe. That's the word I would have used back then. But if you think about it, truly safe places don't make you feel the need to look twice. They don't leave small questions lingering in the back of your mind. And even though I didn't realize it yet, something in that room had already started to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but just enough to plant a thought I couldn't quite shake. A thought that didn't make sense at the time, but would soon become impossible to ignore. Because what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known sitting there in that quiet office, was that I wasn't just waiting to surprise my wife. I was waiting at the edge of something that had been hidden in plain sight. Something that should never have been there in the first place. That if you've ever sat in a place that should feel completely normal, yet something inside you refuses to settle, then you already understand what I'm about to say next. Because it didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden realization, no dramatic shift where everything became clear in an instant. It was slower than that, quieter, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention. And the unsettling part is I almost wasn't. I remember leaning back slightly in that chair, trying to relax, telling myself I was reading too much into a simple pause at the front desk. After all, people hesitate all the time. Words don't always come out perfectly. There are 100 reasonable explanations for something like that, and I went through every single one of them in my mind, one by one, until I convinced myself there was nothing there. But even as I did that, my eyes kept moving. Not searching, not intentionally at least, just observing the way they always have. There was a rhythm to the office. You could feel it if you sat still long enough. Phones ringing at intervals, footsteps crossing from one side to the other, quiet conversations that started and ended without drawing attention. Everything appeared structured, controlled. But what caught my attention wasn't the activity, it was the gaps between it. The moments where things paused just a little too long. The way certain people glanced toward the hallway behind the reception desk, then quickly looked away as if it meant nothing. It wasn't obvious, not enough for anyone to point at and say something was wrong. But it was there, subtle, consistent. And the more I noticed it, the harder it became to ignore. I shifted forward slightly, resting my elbows on my knees, letting my gaze settle more deliberately now. That's when I saw it, not something dramatic, not something that would stand out to most people, but enough. A man walking past the reception area slowed down just for a second when he noticed me sitting there. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes did. A quick flicker of recognition, maybe confusion, and then something else. Something I couldn't quite define at the time. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just kept walking. But that moment stayed with me longer than it should have. And here's where it gets difficult to explain, because up until that point, everything I had noticed could still be dismissed. Individually, none of it meant anything. Pause. A glance. A shift in tone. These are ordinary things, harmless on their own. But when you start placing them together, when you begin to see a pattern forming, even if it's incomplete, that's when your mind starts asking questions you didn't intend to ask. And once those questions begin, they don't stop. I remember exhaling slowly, trying to steady that growing sense of unease. You're overthinking, I told myself. It's a phrase we use often, a way to push things down, to avoid confronting the possibility that something isn't right. And for a moment it worked. I leaned back again, forcing my attention elsewhere, letting my eyes drift toward the desk in front of me, papers neatly arranged, a monitor dimly lit, small objects placed with deliberate order. Just an ordinary workspace. Nothing more. But then, something caught my eye. At first, it didn't register as important. Just another object among many. Something small, almost insignificant. But there was something about it, something that made my focus linger just a second longer than usual. It was a pen. A fountain pen to be precise. Sleek, dark, resting slightly apart from everything else on the desk as if it had been placed there recently, or perhaps used not long ago. And I don't know why. I still can't fully explain it, but something about that pen felt out of place. Not because it didn't belong in an office like that. Of course it did. But because of the way it was positioned, the way it seemed almost noticeable without trying to be. Like it wanted to be seen. And that thought alone should have been enough to make me look away, to dismiss it like everything else. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward. Just slightly at first. Not enough to draw attention. Just enough to see it more clearly. And that's when I noticed the engraving. It wasn't large. It wasn't designed to stand out from a distance. In fact, you could sit where I was sitting and miss it entirely if you weren't looking for it. But I was looking now, whether I meant to be or not. The letters were small, precise, carefully etched into the surface of the pen. A name. And the moment I read it, something inside me went completely still. Because that name wasn't random. It wasn't common. And it definitely didn't belong in that office. It was my daughter's name. Now, you have to understand something. When you see something like that, your mind doesn't immediately jump to the worst conclusion. It tries to protect you. It searches for logic, for coincidence, for any explanation that doesn't involve the possibility you're beginning to fear. Maybe it was a duplicate. Maybe someone else had the same name. Maybe there was a reasonable answer I just hadn't thought of yet. And I clung to that. I really did. Because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to face. But even as I sat there trying to convince myself it meant nothing, I couldn't look away from it. Because deep down, beneath all the explanations, all the denial, there was a question forming. A question I didn't want to ask, but couldn't ignore anymore. Why was my missing daughter's name sitting right in front of me, on a desk inside my wife's office? And the worst part? That pen wasn't just sitting there. It looked like it had been used recently. You know, there's a very specific kind of silence that follows a realization your mind isn't ready to accept. It's not loud, it doesn't rush in all at once. It just settles quietly, almost gently, as if giving you one last chance to deny what you've just seen. That's exactly what happened to me in that moment. I remember staring at that pen longer than I should have, my eyes fixed on those letters as if they might rearrange themselves into something else if I just gave it enough time. But they didn't. They stayed exactly the same, unchanging, undeniable. And the more I looked at it, the harder it became to breathe normally, because now the question wasn't just why does this feel wrong, it was what does this actually mean? And that's a much more dangerous place to be, because once your mind starts asking that question, it doesn't stop until it finds an answer. Now here's what you need to understand. My daughter hadn't just been out of touch or unreachable. She was missing. Completely missing. The kind of missing that changes the way you think, the way you sleep, the way you exist. Days had turned into nights without rest. Conversations had turned into searches, and every possibility, every single one, had already been considered, exhausted, and feared. You start replaying every last detail in your head. The last time you saw them, the last thing they said, the smallest changes in behavior you might have overlooked. And eventually, you reach a point where you stop expecting answers, and start preparing yourself for the worst. That's where I had been, before that moment. A place where hope exists, but only just enough to keep you moving forward. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, her name appears. Not in a report, not in a call, not from the authorities, but here. On a pen. Sitting quietly on a desk in a place that had never once been part of the search. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stood up immediately, caused a scene, demanded answers from the nearest person in sight? Or would you have done what I did, stayed completely still, because a part of you is already afraid of what happens next? Because that's the part no one talks about. The hesitation. The moment where you realize that once you move forward, once you act on what you're seeing, there's no going back to the version of reality you had just a few seconds ago. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to move. Not right away. I wanted, desperately, to find a reason to sit back, to look away, to convince myself that this was just another coincidence stacked on top of 1,000 other meaningless details. But there was a problem with that, and I think you can already see it. The more I tried to ignore that pen, the more it demanded my attention. It wasn't just the name anymore. It was the placement. The fact that it wasn't buried under paperwork or tucked away in a drawer. It was out in the open, within reach, as if it had been used recently and set down without a second thought. And that detail, small as it may seem, was enough to push my thoughts in a direction I couldn't control anymore. Because if it had been used recently, then someone here knew about it. Someone here had held it, written with it, carried it. And that meant one thing. This wasn't random. This was connected. I remember glancing around the office again, this time with a very different perspective. The same people were there, the same quiet conversations, the same controlled environment, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It felt staged. Not intentionally, not in a way you could prove, but in a way you could sense if you paid close enough attention. And suddenly, every small detail I had brushed aside earlier started to come back, one by one. The hesitation at the front desk, the glances toward the hallway, the man who slowed down just slightly when he saw me sitting there. None of it made sense on its own, but together it was starting to form something I couldn't ignore. And yet, I still didn't move. Because there was one thought, one very specific thought, that held me in place. What if I'm wrong? What if I pick up that pen, draw attention to myself, start asking questions, and it turns out to be nothing? What if there's an explanation so simple, so ordinary, that I end up looking like a man who has completely lost control? That fear, it's more powerful than most people realize. The fear of being wrong can keep you from discovering the truth just as easily as the fear of being right. But then, another thought followed it. What if I'm not wrong? And that one doesn't let you sit still for long. I don't remember making a conscious decision after that. There was no moment where I told myself, now I'm going to reach for it. Just happened, slowly, almost instinctively. My hand moved forward across the desk, careful, controlled, as if any sudden motion might draw attention I wasn't ready for. I could feel my heartbeat picking up, not in a dramatic way, but enough to remind me that something was changing, something I couldn't undo once it started. My fingers hovered over the pen for a brief second, just a second, but it felt longer. Long enough for doubt to creep back in, long enough for me to question whether I should stop right there and pretend none of this had happened. But I didn't stop. I picked it up. And the moment I did, I knew. Not because of anything obvious, not because of some dramatic shift or immediate revelation, but because of something far more subtle and far more unsettling. The pen didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt like something I had seen before, something I had held before. And that realization, that quiet, creeping recognition, sent a kind of fear through me that I still can't fully put into words. Because if I was right about that feeling, then this pen didn't just have her name on it. It belonged to her. And that's when I noticed something else. A small detail, almost impossible to hear unless you were holding it exactly the way I was. A faint, mechanical click. Not from the pen itself, but from somewhere nearby. Behind me, or more precisely, behind the wall. There are moments in life when a single sound can change everything, not because of how loud it is, but because of what it implies. That faint mechanical click. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't dramatic. Most people in that room probably didn't even register it. Conversations didn't stop, no one turned their head, nothing in the environment reacted to it. But I did. And the reason I noticed it is because it didn't belong. Not in that space, not in that moment, and certainly not in response to something as simple as picking up a pen. So I stayed completely still, my hand still wrapped around it, my eyes no longer focused on the desk but somewhere else entirely, trying to locate a sound that had already disappeared. Now think about this for a second. How many times do we hear something unusual and immediately dismiss it? A noise in another room, a subtle shift in the environment, something just slightly out of place, and we tell ourselves it's nothing. We move on. We forget it ever happened. But what if that's exactly what keeps us from seeing the truth? What if the things we ignore are the very things we should be paying attention to? Because in that moment I had a choice. I could have set the pen back down, convinced myself it was all in my head, and walked out of that office without ever knowing what was hidden just a few feet away from me. And I'll be honest with you, part of me wanted to do exactly that. Because once you start connecting things that don't make sense, you begin stepping into something you can't control anymore. But I didn't move. Not yet. Instead, I shifted my attention, slowly, carefully, without drawing any unnecessary attention to myself. My head turned just slightly, my eyes scanning the area behind me without making it obvious that I was looking for anything in particular. The wall, it looked completely ordinary. Smooth, uninterrupted, exactly what you'd expect in a place like that. No visible seams, no handles, nothing that would suggest it was anything other than what it appeared to be. And yet, that sound had come from somewhere. It hadn't just appeared out of nothing. I leaned back slightly in my chair, adjusting my position as if I were simply getting comfortable, but in reality, I was trying to change my angle, trying to see something I might have missed the first time. And that's when I noticed it. Not immediately, not in a way that stood out on its own, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The bookshelf. It sat against the wall just a few feet away, filled neatly, organized, perfectly aligned like everything else in that office. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about it. Just rows of files, books, binders, the kind of thing you'd expect in any professional setting. But something about it, something very small, felt off. And the more I looked at it, the clearer it became. It wasn't sitting flush against the wall. Now you have to understand, this wasn't obvious. It wasn't pulled away dramatically or positioned in a way that would draw attention. It was subtle, just a fraction of an inch, maybe less. Enough that most people would never notice it unless they were looking directly for it. But I wasn't most people, not in that moment. Because now, every instinct I had was telling me the same thing. That sound came from there. I felt my grip tighten slightly around the pen, my thoughts racing faster now, trying to piece together something that still didn't fully make sense. A pen with my daughter's name, a mechanical sound triggered the moment I picked it up, and now a bookshelf that wasn't quite where it should be. Each piece on its own could be dismissed, explained away. But together they were forming something far more difficult to ignore. And here's where it changes, because up until now, everything had been observation. Passive. Controlled. But what comes next requires a decision. A choice to move forward, or to walk away and never know. So let me ask you again, what would you have done? Would you have stayed where you were, waited for your wife to come out, pretended everything was normal, and carried that question with you for the rest of your life? Or would you have done what I did, and followed the one thing in that room that didn't make sense? Because once that thought settled in my mind, there was no going back. I placed the pen back down exactly where I had found it, careful, precise, as if nothing had been disturbed. Not because I was trying to hide what I had done, but because something told me that whatever was connected to it wasn't meant to be obvious. And the last thing I wanted was to trigger something I didn't understand. Then I stood up, slowly, calmly, the kind of movement that doesn't draw attention. I adjusted my jacket, glanced briefly toward the front desk, making sure no one was watching too closely, and then I took my first step toward that bookshelf. Every movement felt deliberate now, controlled, but underneath that control, there was something else building. Something heavier. The kind of feeling you get when you're about to confirm something you're not ready to face. The closer I got, the more that small gap became impossible to ignore. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad placement. It was intentional. I stopped just a step away from it, my eyes tracing along the edge where it met the wall, or rather where it didn't quite meet it. My hand lifted slightly, hesitating for just a moment, because this was it. This was the point where everything could still remain unanswered if I chose to step back. But I didn't. My fingers pressed gently against the side of the shelf. At first, nothing happened. And for a brief second, I almost convinced myself that I had been wrong, that all of this, every thought, every connection, had been nothing more than my mind trying to make sense of something ordinary. And then, I applied just a little more pressure. And I felt it. Not a sound this time, not immediately, but a shift. Small, controlled, mechanical. The kind of movement that doesn't belong to something fixed in place. And in that exact moment, every doubt I had left disappeared. Because that bookshelf wasn't just a shelf, it was a door. And whatever was behind it was never meant to be found. I remember standing there, my hands still lightly pressing against the edge of the shelf, feeling it shift under my fingers. It moved almost imperceptibly at first, the kind of sound you might hear if you were straining to catch a whisper in a quiet room. But I heard it. My heart jumped, not in panic, not yet, but in that sharp, unmistakable awareness that something I wasn't meant to know was just on the other side. And there's a kind of silence that follows moments like that. The ordinary noise of the office seemed to fade into the background. Conversations, footsteps, phones ringing, all of it muted into nothing because my mind had narrowed to one single focus, the space behind that shelf. The place I had no right to imagine but could already sense existed. I took another slow, careful step forward, trying to steady my breathing. Years on the bench had taught me the value of patience, observation, calculated movement. All of those lessons now seemed strangely useless because what I was dealing with was not a case in a courtroom, but something far more personal, far more dangerous. Something that could destroy everything I had ever trusted. My gaze traced along the surface of the bookshelf, along the small seam where the wood met the wall. No handles, no obvious signs of a latch. Just the faintest suggestion that this object, this perfectly ordinary office fixture, could actually conceal something far more sinister. And then I noticed it, a tiny irregularity in the floorboard beneath it. A small gap that wasn't aligned like the others. The kind of detail that you normally overlook unless you're looking for it, unless your mind is already searching for a hidden truth. My hand lifted slightly, brushing along the edge of the shelf, and I felt it again, the faint, mechanical give of a hidden hinge. A door. A secret space designed to remain unseen. And that's when the full weight of reality hit me. Whatever was behind that wall had been kept there deliberately, carefully. And the person responsible had assumed I would never see it. A cold shiver ran down my spine and I felt my pulse accelerate. The fear that had been simmering beneath the surface since I first noticed the pen transformed into something deeper, more tangible. What had I stumbled into? How long had it been here? Who else knew? And most importantly, was it too late? I could still walk away. I could pretend I hadn't noticed. I could leave the office and never look back. But the problem with walking away at this point is that once you see the possibilities, once you sense the truth, you can't unsee them. You can't stop asking the questions. And if you do nothing, you leave a person, someone who matters, trapped in whatever nightmare exists behind that wall. I took a breath. Just one long, careful breath. I reminded myself that panic would do nothing. That hesitation beyond what was already necessary would waste precious time. Every instinct in my body screamed to act, but I also knew that reckless movement would be dangerous. This was no ordinary office confrontation. This wasn't a dispute over paperwork or policy or even a simple marital argument. This was a calculated concealment of a child, my child, behind a hidden barrier that someone had deliberately engineered to remain undiscovered. And that realization hit me harder than anything I had ever faced in court. I leaned forward again, this time pressing my weight lightly against the shelf, testing the mechanism without committing fully. There was a faint click, a small, almost polite acknowledgement that the shelf could move if I pushed correctly. My pulse surged. My mind raced, thinking of every possible contingency, every scenario I had imagined 1,000 times before my daughter disappeared. And yet none of them prepared me for this. The slow, creeping certainty that someone in this building, someone I trusted, had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide her from me. The next moments were a careful dance of observation and action. I adjusted my stance, making sure my movements were casual, deliberate. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the receptionist still seated, tapping on a keyboard, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the exact moment when my attention had shifted entirely to that bookshelf. That gave me a narrow window. Just enough. And then, with slow precision, I applied pressure to the edge of the shelf. Not too hard. Not too fast. Just enough for the hinge to give way, for the mechanism to acknowledge my intent without making a sound loud enough to draw attention. And it moved. Slowly. Subtly. Almost imperceptibly at first, but enough that I could feel the weight of the door shift beneath my hand. The faint creak of metal sliding against metal barely registered beyond the confines of my awareness, but for me, it was deafening. A moment of silent anticipation stretched on, and I realized, this is the kind of moment that stays with you forever. The moment where you realize that everything you thought you knew was incomplete. That the person you trusted may not have been entirely honest. That the world as you understood it had hidden a shadow you had never imagined. I paused, my hand resting lightly on the shelf. The gap was widening slowly, just enough for me to glimpse into the darkness beyond. And my mind froze, not in fear of what I would see, but in disbelief at the possibility that this was actually happening. The office, the normalcy, the polite smiles and distant chatter, all of it now felt like a thin veil covering something deeply wrong. And the realization came in that instant. Once I opened this door fully, there would be no going back. There would be no pretending everything was fine. The truth, whatever it was, would be unavoidable. I took another deep breath, steadying myself, reminding myself that panic would only cloud my judgment. I reminded myself that I was Judge Whitmore, retired, yes, but trained to think, to observe, to act carefully even under pressure. And yet, even as I leaned closer, feeling the cool, smooth surface of the shelf beneath my fingertips, I couldn't shake the dread building in my chest. Because this wasn't about a ruling in a courtroom anymore. This was personal. And personal stakes are far more dangerous than any legal precedent. Then, ever so slowly, I gave the shelf one final push. And the wall, the secret barrier that had hidden everything, began to move. Just a fraction. Just enough. To reveal what had been concealed for far too long. And I knew, even before the darkness beyond fully opened to me, that nothing in my life would ever be the same. The gap widened gradually, almost teasingly, as if whatever lay beyond wanted me to hesitate, to reconsider, to retreat while I still could. But retreat was no longer an option. My hands were steady now, gripping the edge of the door shelf with careful control, and every sense in my body was heightened. I could feel the temperature drop slightly as the darkness behind the wall became more apparent, carrying with it the faintest scent, musty, cold, something that had been sealed away for weeks, maybe months. My mind raced, trying to prepare for what I might find, but all preparation in the world could not erase the fear gnawing at me. Because the unknown, the deliberate unknown, has a way of overwhelming even the most disciplined mind. I inched closer, leaning forward so I could peer into the shadows beyond. And the first thing I noticed was how small the space was. Not a room as you might imagine, large or spacious, but a narrow, confined chamber built for concealment, not comfort. The walls were bare, except for a few crude supports that suggested it had been constructed hastily, or perhaps deliberately to remain unnoticed. And then my eyes fell on the items scattered along the floor, small, personal things that shouldn't have been there. A backpack, a pair of shoes, a doll that looked as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. My chest tightened. The reality of what I was seeing hit me all at once. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some random storage area. Someone had placed a person, a child, here, and intended for them to remain hidden from the world. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly because fear can make you do strange things. Freeze, panic, or worse, act recklessly. But I had to stay composed. I had to think. Every instinct screamed that I should call for help, yet another part of me reminded me of the stakes. Whoever had done this had clearly planned it carefully. Any loud movement could trigger something unknown. I had to proceed quietly, carefully, deliberately. Every step mattered. The darkness beyond the door swallowed the office light almost entirely. I reached forward slowly, feeling along the walls, tracing the edge of the small room, and then my hand brushed against a small bundle huddled in the corner. My heart stopped for just a moment because the shape, it was unmistakable. A small figure. Fragile. Shivering. Terrified. And when it shifted slightly, lifting its head, I saw her. My daughter. My little girl, alive, scared, confused, staring at me with wide eyes that mirrored a mixture of relief and horror. Relief because I was there. Horror because she didn't understand why she had been trapped in this place, hidden from the world she knew. And I felt it, an overwhelming mix of guilt, rage, fear, and protectiveness that I cannot fully describe. That mixture, intense and consuming, drove me forward. I crouched slowly, careful not to frighten her further, my eyes scanning her face, trying to communicate silently that everything would be okay, that I had found her. And she hesitated, as though unsure if she could trust me yet. That hesitation, it was understandable. What child, forced into hiding by someone they should be able to trust, would immediately believe their rescuer? And in that moment, the weight of the betrayal became almost physical. Whoever had done this, had manipulated her world, twisted it, reshaped her reality in ways that made fear and doubt her constant companions. And that realization, bitter as it was, only strengthened my resolve. I had to get her out. But how? And what would happen when the person responsible found out I was here? I slowly extended my hand toward her, careful to keep my voice calm, soothing. "It's okay, it's me," I whispered, barely above a breath. Her eyes flicked toward me, scanning my face, searching for something familiar, something safe. And finally, after a tense moment that felt like hours, she reached out tentatively. The touch was brief, but it confirmed what my mind already knew. She was alive. She was here. And somehow, we were going to get out of this. But as relief began to wash over me, another thought hit. The pen. The clicks. The careful concealment. Whoever had orchestrated this was still out there, watching, waiting. And the realization that this might not be over, that the danger wasn't confined to this small, hidden space, sent another spike of fear through me. My mind raced with questions. How long had she been here? How many people knew? Was this just the beginning? And most importantly, who would I be facing once we stepped back into the world beyond this room? Every instinct in my body screamed to act fast, yet cautiously. I had to remove her from here, but I couldn't afford mistakes. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the room itself were aware of what had transpired. And as I lifted her gently, cradling her close, I realized something even darker. This wasn't merely a physical confinement. Whoever had done this had also tried to isolate her mentally, to keep her fearful, uncertain, dependent on the one thing that controlled her environment. And now, for the first time, she would begin to see a world where she was not trapped, where she was safe, where she had me. And yet, even as that thought comforted me, a part of me shivered at the knowledge that the person responsible was not done. Not by a long shot. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, trying to plan our exit. But the truth was, the exit from this room was only the beginning. There was a larger web of deception, of betrayal, of calculated cruelty waiting just outside these walls. And I knew that once we stepped back into that office, nothing would be simple. Every step, every interaction, every glance, could betray us. The danger was no longer just about her being hidden. It was about her being found, and the consequences that would follow. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of everything that had brought us here. Not just the hiding of my daughter, not just the betrayal of trust, but the realization that the person you think you know best can sometimes be the one you need to fear the most. I held her close, my mind racing faster than my heart ever had in a courtroom. Years of judgment, years of assessing truth and deception, had never prepared me for this, The sheer personal betrayal of someone I had trusted completely. The office around us, once mundane, now felt like a stage for secrets far too dark to imagine. Every sound, the distant murmur of conversation, the faint hum of a computer, even the creak of floorboards, seemed amplified, each one a potential signal that our fragile moment of discovery could shatter at any second. And in that tension, my thoughts kept returning to a single question. How could anyone hide a child here? And why? Her small hands clutched my jacket, trembling. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. And I understood that silence perfectly, because fear had a language of its own, one that doesn't rely on words. It's a language that communicates through hesitation, through wide eyes, through subtle shivers. And the truth of it hit me harder than anything I'd faced on the bench. The betrayal here wasn't just about secrecy. It was about control. Someone had calculated every step of this concealment to ensure she remained powerless, to ensure she could not escape. And now that she could see me, now that I could hold her, the stakes had shifted. I shifted my position slightly, adjusting my hold on her, careful not to jostle her or startle her. My eyes scanned the room again. Items that had seemed insignificant at first, the doll, the backpack, the shoes, suddenly became evidence of planning, proof of deliberate confinement. Whoever had done this had thought of every detail, how to keep her calm, how to limit movement, how to obscure her presence from anyone who might look too closely. And each item whispered to me about the cruelty behind the act, each one a reminder that this was not a simple mistake, not an impulsive act. It was calculated, premeditated, and terrifyingly intimate. I could feel her trembling against me. I whispered softly, almost inaudibly, "It's okay, you're safe now. I've got you." And as I spoke, I felt her relax ever so slightly, her tiny arms loosening their grip, her body still tense but beginning to trust the presence she hadn't dared to hope for until now. And in that trust, I felt a surge of determination. Whoever had hidden her here, whoever had orchestrated this betrayal, would have to answer for it. But even as that resolve strengthened, another, darker awareness crept into my mind. This wasn't just about finding her. This wasn't simply about revealing the secret and walking away. Whoever had planned this, someone close enough to know my routines, to know how I would act, was still out there, watching, waiting. And that knowledge, cold, silent, unrelenting, made every second heavier. The moment we left this room, the confrontation would begin. And I had to prepare, even as the adrenaline pulsed through my veins. I glanced toward the small light that seeped in from the office beyond the hidden wall. Our exit route, simple in structure, now seemed fraught with risk. Every step outside this room could trigger something we weren't ready for. Every sound, every movement might betray our presence. I tried to steady my breathing, counting silently to calm my nerves. The truth was clear. The room had been designed for secrecy, but it had not anticipated determination, vigilance, or the desperation of a parent who would go to any length to protect their child. And yet, even as I planned, even as I braced for what would come, my mind wandered briefly to my wife. The woman I had trusted, the person I had thought shared my life, my routines, my values. And suddenly, the betrayal became almost too much to bear. I could not yet reconcile her presence in this scenario. Was she complicit or simply unaware? And that uncertainty, arguably worse than knowing, made every second stretch into an eternity. I lifted her slightly, adjusting my hold to ensure she was stable. My own pulse hammered in my ears as I took the first careful step toward the door, testing the space, listening for any sign that our movements had been noticed. Nothing. The silence continued. But in that silence, the room seemed to hold its breath, as though aware that the boundary between discovery and confrontation had just been crossed. I whispered again, softer this time, letting the words fall like a shield, "We'll get out. I promise you, we'll get out." And as I said it, I realized that what lay beyond this hidden space was far larger than just the office walls, the front desk, the corridors. The betrayal, the manipulation, the deception, it extended beyond the visible, into the very heart of the life I thought I knew. And that thought, chilling, heavy, and inescapable, was the last thing I felt before stepping fully into the next phase of what would be the most harrowing day of my life. Every instinct screamed caution. Every memory reminded me of judgment and deliberation, of patience and strategy. And yet, even armed with all that experience, I knew that what awaited outside this small, hidden chamber would challenge everything I believed about trust, family, and the lengths someone could go to manipulate the life of another. Because once a betrayal is revealed, there's no turning back. I took a long, slow breath, letting it out quietly, almost imperceptibly, as I shifted my weight and began moving toward the edge of the hidden room. Every footstep was deliberate, measured, careful not to make a sound. The floor beneath my shoes creaked ever so slightly, a soft reminder that even the smallest noise could betray our presence. Her head rested lightly against my chest, and I could feel her tiny body trembling, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming uncertainty of the world she had been forced to endure. My mind kept racing, cycling through possibilities. Who had orchestrated this? How long had it been going on? Were there others watching? And the more I thought, the heavier the weight of that unanswered question became. The gap of light from the office beyond the shelf seemed impossibly small, yet it was enough to illuminate faint shapes and movements that told a story I hadn't wanted to consider. Every detail was magnified. The position of a chair, the tilt of a desk, a notebook left open as if abandoned in a hurry. All of it screamed intentionality. This was not happenstance. This was meticulous planning. Someone had deliberately constructed this environment to hide a child, to isolate her completely, to keep her invisible to the world. And now that I was here, now that I had found her, the stakes were higher than ever. I whispered softly to her, almost more to calm myself than her, "We'll be okay. We'll be out soon." Her small hands tightened on my jacket, as if anchoring herself to the only certainty she had in that moment, me. And I felt the full weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Every instinct told me to move quickly, to get her out safely, but my years as a judge reminded me that haste can be fatal. One misstep could alert someone. One sound could provoke a reaction we weren't ready for. Every second had to be calculated. Every movement deliberate. And yet, fear had a way of twisting your perception of time, stretching it into an almost unbearable eternity. I paused for a fraction of a second before stepping fully into the light of the office, scanning the area carefully. The room appeared calm, ordinary even, but that calmness only made the tension more suffocating. Silence can be deceptive. It's in silence that people hide, that plans are carried out unseen, that threats linger without warning. I could feel the eyes of the space on me, though I saw no one. The receptionist continued typing at her desk, her head tilted downward as if absorbed in her own work. But now I noticed subtleties I had missed before. The slight twitch of her fingers, the faint glance toward the hallway, the almost imperceptible change in posture as I emerged from the shadows. Each detail was a potential signal. Each small movement a possible warning. The hallway stretched beyond the reception area, empty but for the quiet hum of air conditioning and distant chatter from other offices. And as we moved, every step seemed amplified in my own ears, a rhythmic drumbeat of tension. I kept her close, lowering my voice further, whispering reassurances that were as much for me as for her. "It's all right. You're safe now. I've got you." And as I spoke, her grip loosened just slightly, signaling a fragile trust beginning to take root. But it was delicate. Fragile. One wrong word, one unexpected noise, one sudden movement could shatter it entirely. Every instinct I had honed over decades, the observation, the patience, the reading of human behavior, was in overdrive. I noticed the subtle patterns in the office. Who glanced toward us, who maintained distance, the timing of movements, the pauses between words. Each tiny detail became a clue, a potential threat, or an opportunity. And the further we moved, the more I realized that whoever had orchestrated this hiding place had not been careless. They had anticipated discovery. They had accounted for the possibility of someone searching, someone acting, someone challenging their control. I slowed my pace as we approached the outer door of the office, giving myself time to assess the environment. The hallway beyond led to multiple exits, each one a potential danger zone. And my mind raced with calculations. Which path would provide the least risk? Which door was monitored, which was likely unobserved? Every decision mattered. Every step counted. And even as I planned, a creeping realization took hold. The person responsible may have been closer than I thought. Watching from nearby. Waiting for the precise moment to act. I whispered again, softer this time, letting the words fall like a shield between us and the unknown. Almost there, just a few more steps. Her small body pressed against mine, trembling slightly, yet trusting me enough to move forward. And in that fragile moment, I felt a surge of anger, sharp and unrelenting. Anger at whoever had done this. Anger at the betrayal. Anger at the audacity of thinking a child could be hidden so completely, so deliberately, in a place I once considered ordinary and safe. But fear, as always, was a constant companion. Every shadow, every corner, every muffled sound reminded me that danger was still very real. And the knowledge that someone could be observing, waiting for a misstep, made each movement heavier, each breath more deliberate. And then, just as we approached the exit from the building, I froze. A sound, a subtle shuffle, a quiet click, echoed from one of the side corridors. Not loud enough to alert anyone else, but unmistakable. Someone was there. Watching. Waiting. And I knew without a doubt that leaving this office would not end the threat. It would only change its shape, move it into a new, more unpredictable form. But retreat was no longer an option. I couldn't leave her here. I couldn't abandon her again. And so, with my heart pounding, my mind calculating every possible outcome, I stepped forward, preparing to confront whatever lay ahead, because finding her was only the first step in a journey none of us were truly ready for. We moved slowly down the corridor, my daughter clinging lightly to me, and the silence was almost unbearable. Every sound, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the distant murmur of voices, the soft tapping of my own shoes against the floor, seemed amplified as though the building itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, every shadow felt alive. Every doorway could conceal someone watching. Every corner might hide the person who had orchestrated this nightmare. I found myself scanning every angle, calculating angles of visibility, escape routes, potential threats. The training I had as a judge, the years of reading people, assessing risks, all of it suddenly mattered in ways I had never imagined. Her tiny body was tense against mine, trembling slightly with each step. I whispered reassurances, soft and low, the kind that could barely be heard even by her. "It's okay, we're almost out. Nothing can touch you now. I've got you." And yet, even as I said it, I couldn't shake the cold certainty that the danger wasn't gone. Whoever had hidden her here had thought carefully about contingencies, about who could discover the secret, about how to maintain control. And I realized that leaving this building would not end the nightmare, it would only bring us into a more exposed phase of it. We passed the reception area, still calm, still oblivious, or perhaps pretending to be. I could feel the weight of observation, though I saw no one directly looking at us. The receptionist's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her head down, her posture too rigid, too measured. Every movement was deliberate, yet subtle. My mind raced with the possibilities. Could she be complicit? Or was she simply another piece in a carefully orchestrated system of deceit? And if she was watching, what would happen the moment she realized I had discovered the hidden room? I slowed my pace further, counting each step in my mind, forcing myself to be deliberate, controlled. Every instinct screamed caution. I had to protect her, yes, but I also had to be aware, constantly aware, of the environment around us. And as we neared the main exit corridor, I noticed something else. Subtle marks along the floor, scuff patterns that suggested someone had been moving quietly, deliberately, possibly following our path. The thought chilled me. We weren't just walking out of a building, we were stepping into someone else's plan, someone who had likely anticipated every move we might make. Her trembling grew slightly stronger, and I lowered my voice even further, whispering a string of reassurances as I calculated our next move. "Stay calm, almost there, you're safe with me." And for a brief moment, I could feel her relax a fraction, trusting my presence. That trust, fragile, delicate, earned in seconds, was now the only shield she had against the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. And I realized with a deep, gut-wrenching awareness that my own fear could not show. Not now. Not ever. Every ounce of control I had over my emotions had to be maintained, because her safety depended on it. As we approached the door that led toward the outside corridor, I paused. My hand hovered over the handle, my fingers pressing lightly against the cold metal. The faintest click echoed in my ears, though no one else seemed to notice. I could feel the tension coiling in the space around us, as though the building itself was aware that a hidden truth had been uncovered. My pulse quickened. Every second stretched out, every movement weighted with the possibility of exposure. And in that instant, I realized that even after finding her, the journey was far from over. The person responsible, someone who had betrayed everything I believed about trust, family, safety, was still out there. Watching. Waiting. And perhaps, even now, planning their next move. I took a slow, deliberate breath, centering myself, preparing for the moment we would step into the corridor and move toward freedom. My daughter's small hands clutched my jacket tightly, a silent reminder of the stakes, of the responsibility I bore. And as I pushed the door open gently, moving her with me into the next stretch of hallway, I became acutely aware that this was no longer just about escape. It was about confrontation. About unraveling a betrayal that went far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Every instinct screamed that someone was watching us even now, that each step brought us closer to a confrontation we were unprepared for. But there was no turning back. Not when she was here. Not when the fragile trust she had begun to place in me demanded action. I whispered one final time, soft and steady, almost out, "Stay close." And as we moved forward into the corridor, I could feel the weight of every secret, every betrayal, every calculated act of deceit pressing in around us. And I realized in that moment that the path ahead would be far more dangerous than anything we had faced so far. Because betrayal, when deliberate, doesn't end in a hidden room. It follows you. Shadows follow. Intentions linger. And the moment you think you're safe is often the exact moment when the trap begins. We kept moving down the corridor, every step calculated, every movement deliberate. My daughter's small hands clung to me, her grip tight, her body pressed close as though sensing the invisible danger that hung in the air around us. I could feel her trembling more now, and I whispered softly, almost as if speaking too loudly might trigger the unseen threat. "It's okay, stay close, we're almost there." My voice was calm, steady, but inside, my mind was racing faster than I had ever allowed it to move in years of presiding over the most intense court cases. The hallway stretched on, longer than it had appeared from the office side. Shadows pooled along the walls, deepening in corners, hiding shapes that might or might not be there. I kept my head moving slowly, scanning every doorway, every niche, every dark space where someone could be waiting, and my heart beat faster with every silent possibility. Every step felt like walking a tightrope above an abyss, and I knew that the faintest mistake could change everything in an instant. I paused for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light, listening for the faintest hint of movement beyond what the building offered naturally. Footsteps, a cough, a shuffle, anything could signal the presence of someone else. And yet, silence persisted. The calmness itself was unnerving, as though the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment to strike. I realized that the person who had orchestrated this had thought of every contingency. Every escape route, every blind spot, every potential witness, they had accounted for all of it. And now, I had to navigate that plan while protecting her, while staying alive, and while trying to maintain the fragile trust that had begun to form between us. Her head pressed lightly against my chest, and I could feel her heartbeat, rapid and shallow. I whispered again, a steady, soft reassurance, "You're safe with me." Just a little farther. She didn't respond with words, but the slight relaxation of her body told me she was listening, that she believed me at least for now. And that belief, fragile, tenuous but real, was my anchor, the one thing keeping my own fear from taking over completely. As we approached the end of the corridor, I noticed subtle irregularities in the environment that I hadn't seen before. Marks on the floor, faint scuffs along the walls, slight misalignments in the trim. Small details, almost imperceptible to anyone not actively searching, but each one a silent signal of preparation, of deliberate design. Whoever had built this world of concealment had left traces, intentional or not, and now each trace was a warning, a puzzle, a clue. My mind catalogued them all, weighing their significance, preparing for what might lie beyond the next corner. I slowed my pace, deliberately, counting my breaths, listening to the building around us. The faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as though even the environment were aware of the high stakes. I thought about the receptionist, about other staff, about anyone who might appear in the next moments. Each scenario played through my mind, every potential movement, every possible reaction, every threat assessed and recalculated. My experience in court had taught me to anticipate human behavior, to read subtle cues, to predict actions. But nothing could have prepared me for the heightened stakes of a child's life in the balance. We reached a corner leading to the main exit corridor and I froze. A faint sound echoed behind us, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, a creak that could have been a floorboard settling. But I knew better. Someone was there. Watching. Waiting. And the realization struck me with chilling clarity. Leaving the building was only the first step. Once we entered open spaces, once the safety of shadows ended, we would be fully exposed to whoever had orchestrated this nightmare. I held my breath, listening, calculating. My daughter's grip tightened instinctively and I whispered softly, "Stay calm, we're almost safe." The words were meant to comfort her, but they also reminded me of my own vulnerability. I had to project strength, control, and calm, even as every nerve screamed for caution. I moved slowly forward, one careful step at a time, scanning every angle, preparing to respond instantly to any threat, knowing that any hesitation could be fatal. The door to the main exit loomed ahead. Beyond it lay freedom, or at least the possibility of it, but also the unknown. I could feel my pulse quicken, a rhythm matched only by the fear coiling tight in my stomach. And yet, in that tension, a sense of clarity emerged. Whoever had hidden her here, Whoever had betrayed our trust would have to confront the truth eventually, and I would be ready. I glanced down at her briefly, her wide eyes fixed on me, searching for assurance, for protection. And in that moment, I understood fully that what lay ahead would not just test our physical safety. It would test every shred of patience, every ounce of resolve, every fragment of cunning I had left. Because betrayal, deliberate and intimate, rarely ends quietly. It follows. It hunts. And now it would follow us out of the shadows and into the open. With that thought, I exhaled slowly, lifted her slightly, and took the first deliberate step toward the exit, aware that every movement from here on would be a delicate negotiation between safety and exposure, courage and fear, trust and the ever-looming shadow of betrayal. And in that quiet, tense corridor, I realized something fundamental. Finding her was only the beginning. The real challenge, unraveling the betrayal, confronting the one responsible, and ensuring she was truly safe, had only just begun. The door to the main exit loomed before me, a barrier that promised freedom yet carried with it the weight of unknown consequences. I could feel her small hands clutching my jacket, her fingers trembling against me, and I whispered once again, low and steady, "Almost there, just a few more steps." The words were a fragile thread connecting us to a sense of safety that didn't yet exist. Every sound in that corridor, the soft hum of ventilation, the faint scuff of distant footsteps, the occasional creak of the floor, felt amplified, magnified by the tension that gripped us both. Every shadow seemed alive, every doorway a potential threat, every faint noise a signal of unseen eyes tracking our movement. I slowed our pace even further, leaning slightly forward to shield her, to make my presence the first thing anyone would notice should we be observed. The adrenaline coursing through me was a strange mixture of fear, rage, and calculated focus. My years as a judge had taught me to remain composed under pressure, to assess situations with clarity and patience, but the stakes here were utterly different. This wasn't a case in a courtroom. There was no jury, no procedure, no way to control the environment beyond my own immediate actions. It was a child's life hanging in the balance, and every decision, every movement carried enormous weight. As we approached the corner leading to the lobby, my mind catalogued every possibility. Could someone be hiding nearby waiting for us? Had the person responsible anticipated our discovery, our escape, our confrontation? Could the receptionist, who had seemed oblivious before, be watching us now, silently communicating with someone else in the building? Every detail demanded scrutiny. The tilt of a monitor, the faint shift in a chair, the subtle reflection in a polished surface. The ordinary office had transformed into a landscape of hidden dangers, and I had to navigate it carefully to ensure we emerged unscathed. Her grip on me tightened, instinctively protective as we rounded the corner. I whispered again, steady and calm, "You're doing so well. Stay close to me." Her wide eyes searched mine, seeking reassurance, and I could feel her trusting me despite the terror she had endured. That trust, fragile as it was, anchored me in the moment, sharpening my focus. I reminded myself that fear could not dictate our pace. Patience, observation, and subtlety were our only tools to move forward safely. The lobby opened before us, bathed in pale light that contrasted sharply with the shadows we had just emerged from. Every detail demanded attention. The polished floors reflected shapes and movement, creating illusions that could mask or betray threats. Chairs were positioned near desks in seemingly random arrangements, yet I knew instinctively that someone had accounted for every angle, every possible hiding spot. The receptionist's gaze remained downward, hands moving over the keyboard, yet something in her posture, slight, almost imperceptible, told me to remain alert. I adjusted my hold on my daughter, cradling her closer to protect her from exposure. I whispered softly, "Almost out, just a little more." The words were both reassurance and command, guiding her through a situation too complex and terrifying for her to process fully. Every instinct screamed caution. One wrong movement, one sudden noise, and the fragile balance of safety could be shattered. And as I assessed the lobby, I realized the extent of the calculated environment around us. Every obstacle, every ordinary object, could be leveraged by someone intent on controlling the outcome. We moved with deliberate slowness, each step measured, each motion controlled. The air seemed heavier, denser, as if charged with anticipation. And in that atmosphere, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down. Not just the act itself, but the realization that someone close to us had orchestrated this, had deliberately manipulated events to isolate, control, and terrify. My mind catalogued every interaction, every detail, every subtle indication of complicity or awareness from those around us. The building, once mundane, was now a maze of suspicion and hidden motives. As we neared the main doors, I paused briefly, scanning every angle. Reflections in glass, shadows along walls, subtle movements in peripheral vision. Everything had potential meaning. My pulse quickened as I realized that the person responsible might be observing, might have anticipated this escape, might be waiting for the precise moment to intervene. Every fiber of my being was alert, every sense heightened. And yet, my daughter's trust gave me the courage to continue, to take the next step despite the fear coiling tightly in my chest. I exhaled slowly, steadying my nerves. The lobby stretched ahead, ordinary in appearance but loaded with potential danger. I whispered again, "We're almost free, just a few more steps." Her small hands clutched me instinctively, and I could feel the tension in her body. Every movement was deliberate, every action measured. I reminded myself that this was not just about reaching the exit. It was about navigating a carefully orchestrated environment, one designed to maintain control and concealment. And the thought of confronting the person responsible, of unraveling the deception that had ensnared us, loomed larger with every step. We moved again, slowly, cautiously, until the main doors were just ahead. The promise of freedom was palpable, yet tempered by the knowledge that the danger had not ended. The betrayal we had uncovered extended beyond the hidden room, beyond the walls of the office, into the very network of trust we had relied upon. And I knew with a cold certainty that once we stepped outside, we would be facing not only the physical threat of exposure, but the emotional and psychological consequences of betrayal that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. With one final, deliberate breath, I reached for the door handle. My daughter pressed closer, her trust palpable and fragile. And in that moment, I realized fully that the journey we had begun in that hidden room was far from over. The danger, the betrayal, the calculated cruelty, none of it had ended. What lay ahead was unpredictable, perilous, and unavoidable. And as I slowly pushed the door open, I knew that the real confrontation, the unraveling of the betrayal, and the fight to ensure she was truly safe, was only just beginning. The door creaked open slowly, revealing the faint light of the exterior, the first taste of freedom after what felt like an eternity in shadow. I stepped through cautiously, holding my daughter close, and felt the sudden contrast of cold air against the warmth we had carried inside. The city street beyond the building seemed ordinary, almost mundane, yet every sense screamed caution. Cars passed by, people moved in the distance, and the faint hum of everyday life pressed against the tension I carried like a living weight. To anyone else this might have seemed like a normal day, but to us, the world had shifted irreversibly. The hidden room, the calculated betrayal, the betrayal of trust. It followed us now, invisible yet omnipresent. I adjusted my grip on her, feeling the tiny rise and fall of her chest against mine. Her hands clung instinctively and I whispered, low and deliberate, "We're safe for now, stay with me." But even as I spoke, I knew that safety was fragile, a temporary illusion. Whoever had orchestrated this nightmare could not be far away. Every instinct screamed it. Every subtle shift in the distant movements of pedestrians, every glint of reflective glass, every shadow along the buildings, my mind catalogued it all. Observation was no longer a courtroom skill, it had become survival. The street itself seemed endless, stretching outward in both directions, a landscape of potential threats hidden beneath the ordinary. I scanned the sidewalks, the windows of nearby buildings, the alleyways where someone could be lurking. The betrayal that had brought us to this moment was not confined to walls or offices. It had extended into the world we thought we knew. And now, each step forward carried risk, not just of physical danger but of exposure, of alerting the one who had sought to control our lives through fear and secrecy. I guided her gently, keeping her close, moving along the sidewalk with deliberate slowness. Her eyes were wide, darting between the ordinary scenes of people going about their day and the invisible danger that lurked in her imagination, magnified by fear. I could feel the weight of her trust pressing on me like gravity, a responsibility that was absolute and unrelenting. And in that moment, I realized that every decision I made, every path I chose, every glance I took could determine whether that trust would endure or shatter entirely. We passed a small park, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, their shadows stretching across the pavement. Children played on swings, laughter ringing through the air, a cruel contrast to the terror we had just escaped. My mind catalogued every potential risk. Hidden observers among the trees, someone watching from parked cars, anyone who could recognize us and signal to the orchestrator of this nightmare. I calculated distances, lines of sight, escape routes, all while keeping her reassured and calm. "Almost there, keep close," I whispered, my voice a fragile lifeline between her fear and the fragile hope that we might make it through this unscathed. As we continued, I noticed subtle signs that the environment itself had become part of the threat. A car parked just slightly off the curb, its engine idling silently. A shadow flitting across a building's reflective surface, too deliberate to be random. Even the ordinary pedestrians seemed like potential hazards, their movements carrying possibilities I could not ignore. Every instinct told me to remain vigilant, to anticipate the unexpected, and to be prepared for immediate action. This was no longer a journey to freedom. It was a test of strategy, patience, and nerve. Her small hands tightened against me again, and I felt her body shiver slightly. I whispered softly, "We're almost clear, just a few more steps." But even as I said it, I knew that the few more steps were laden with uncertainty. The betrayal that had hidden her in that room could manifest anywhere, in any form, and the true extent of the danger had yet to reveal itself. The emotional weight pressed down on me, the realization that someone I had trusted, someone close enough to plan this meticulously, had betrayed not only me but the fragile security of her entire world. Every shadow, every reflective surface, every corner of the street felt like a potential trap. I moved with deliberate care, guiding her along the route I had mentally mapped, aware that exposure now could provoke a confrontation unlike anything I had prepared for. And yet, amid the fear, a fragile glimmer of hope persisted. We had escaped the hidden room. We had taken the first steps into the open world. And though the betrayal was far from resolved, though the danger was far from over, the act of moving forward, slowly, carefully, deliberately, was itself a victory. And in that long, tense walk through the city streets, I realized something undeniable. Betrayal leaves shadows that follow you, that linger beyond the confines of walls and offices. But trust, even fragile, tenuous trust, has the power to guide you through the darkest corridors, both literal and metaphorical. Every step we took, every breath we shared, was a defiance of the cruelty that had sought to control her life. And though the path ahead was uncertain, perilous, and fraught with invisible threats, I knew we had already taken the first decisive step toward reclaiming not just freedom, but the right to confront betrayal on our own terms. Because the journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, and the confrontation, the reckoning, and the truth awaited just beyond the horizon. We moved along the street, the city unfolding before us like a stage set for danger disguised as normality. Every step carried weight, every shadow seemed to watch, every passerby a potential threat. My daughter's small hands were pressed tightly against my jacket, her fingers trembling slightly. I whispered softly, "Stay close, we'll be safe soon." But even as I spoke, I knew that safety was a fragile illusion, temporary and conditional. The person responsible for this nightmare had shown foresight, calculation, and patience. Whoever had hidden her had anticipated discovery, anticipated the possibility of resistance, and now, I realized, could be monitoring our escape at this very moment. The air outside was sharp and crisp, a contrast to the musty, confined darkness we had left behind. Yet even as the chill brushed against our skin, the environment itself became another source of tension. Parked cars, alleyways, and the reflective windows of nearby buildings all seemed to conceal potential eyes, potential traps. Each ordinary object, the corner of a lamppost, a stack of crates beside a delivery door, felt imbued with the possibility of hidden observation. Every instinct in my body screamed for extreme caution, for slow, deliberate movements, for constant vigilance. Her breathing was shallow but steady. I adjusted my hold slightly, ensuring she felt secure while also protecting her from sudden exposure. "Almost there, just a little more," I murmured. Her eyes flicked toward me, trusting, frightened, yet willing to follow the only person who had consistently guided her through fear. That trust was both fragile and sacred, and I felt the crushing weight of responsibility pressing down on me. One wrong move, one sudden noise, one uncalculated step could destroy it, and potentially put her life in immediate danger. We passed a narrow side street, dimly lit, seemingly deserted. I instinctively slowed, scanning every corner, every shadow, every hint of movement. My mind catalogued the subtle irregularities: a parked car slightly ajar, a brief reflection in a store window, the way distant footsteps echoed with irregular cadence. Every detail was a potential warning, every anomaly a signal of surveillance or premeditated observation. Whoever had engineered this betrayal had not acted recklessly. This had been deliberate, calculated. And now they were probably watching, waiting for the exact moment to strike. Her grip tightened again, instinctively protective, as we moved past a small public plaza. I whispered, low and deliberate, "We're almost free, stay close to me." The words were a lifeline, a tether between fear and trust. Her fragile belief in my presence anchored me as well, forcing me to suppress my own fear and maintain absolute vigilance. Every shadow could conceal movement, every reflective surface could betray our position. And yet, despite all this, her small body clinging to mine reminded me that I had to keep moving forward. The betrayal we had uncovered in the hidden room now felt like a living presence, invisible yet constant. It extended beyond walls, beyond offices, beyond the people we thought we knew. The person responsible had sought control, secrecy, and fear, and I understood in that moment that the path to freedom was not just about distance, but about strategy, observation, and patience. One misstep, one error in judgment, could trigger consequences we were not prepared to face. As we approached a main avenue, the sounds of the city grew louder, cars passing, distant voices, the hum of activity. Ordinary life, mundane and indifferent, contrasted sharply with the terror we had just escaped. I scanned continuously, noting every detail: who looked at us, who seemed distracted, which movements were deliberate, which accidental. Every instinct, every judgment honed over decades, was focused on protection and detection. And yet, the psychological weight pressed relentlessly. The knowledge that the person responsible could strike at any moment, could manipulate appearances, could turn the familiar into danger in an instant. I whispered again, steady and calm, "Almost there, we're going to make it." Her trust, fragile but present, was a beacon amid the uncertainty. Every step required calculation: how to move quietly, how to avoid drawing attention, how to remain invisible even in plain sight. The betrayal we had faced was not just a physical concealment but a mental and emotional trap, designed to isolate, confuse, and instill fear. And now, the real challenge was moving beyond it, navigating the world that had been infiltrated by deception without succumbing to panic, without revealing vulnerability. With every careful step, I realized the journey ahead would test not just our physical safety but our emotional resilience. The betrayal, deliberate and intimate, could manifest anywhere, in any form. And yet, despite the fear, despite the constant vigilance required, there was a glimmer of hope. We were moving forward, together, and with trust slowly rebuilding between us, there was a chance to confront the truth, to reclaim control, and to ensure that the person responsible could no longer manipulate or harm us. Because betrayal is never confined to a hidden room. It follows. It watches. It waits. And the moment we step into open air, into the world that seems normal, is the exact moment the reckoning begins. Every breath, every movement, every cautious glance now carries significance far beyond what anyone passing by could ever comprehend. And as we moved steadily forward, I realized one undeniable truth: survival depended not just on speed or stealth, but on unwavering focus, absolute vigilance, and the fragile, precious trust of the one who had been betrayed. The avenue stretched before us, wide and seemingly ordinary, but I knew better. Every passing car, every pedestrian, every reflective window carried potential threats. My daughter's small hands remained pressed against my jacket, and I could feel her trembling with each step. "Stay close, don't let go," I whispered, my voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. It was the only way to keep her grounded, to maintain the fragile trust that had begun to form between us. The city moved around us, indifferent to our fear, unaware of the betrayal that had unfolded just moments ago. Yet every detail was magnified to my senses: the echo of footsteps on concrete, the subtle movement of a shadow in a doorway, the distant sound of a car door closing. My eyes scanned constantly, taking in the minutiae of the environment: the slight tilt of a street sign, the glint of sunlight on glass, the pattern of people walking. Each observation could signal safety or danger. And I knew that the person responsible for hiding her had planned for every possible variable. Her grip tightened instinctively as we approached a small park that cut across the avenue. Children's laughter rang out, a cruel contrast to the fear that still clung to us. I lowered my voice, soft and deliberate. "We're almost clear, just a few more steps." Her head pressed against my chest, and I felt the tension in her body begin to ease slightly, though only marginally. Trust was a fragile thing, easily shattered, and I could not allow it to falter now, not when we had come this far. I moved slowly, deliberately, calculating each step. The betrayal that had concealed her was no longer confined to the building, it extended into the world itself. Someone close had anticipated discovery, had manipulated environments and routines, and perhaps even now was watching us, waiting for the precise moment to act. My senses were on high alert, every instinct focused on detecting subtle threats before they could become real. Every shadow, every reflective surface, Every distant movement was a puzzle to be interpreted, a potential signal of danger. We reached the edge of the park and I paused for a moment, letting my eyes sweep the area. A few people passed by, none paying attention to us, but the possibility that any one of them could be involved lingered like a cold shadow. My mind raced through scenarios. Who could have orchestrated this? How many people knew? Was this just one person or a network of careful manipulation? Each thought added weight to every step, a tension that seemed to thicken the air around us. Her small hand pressed harder against me and I whispered, "Almost there, keep trusting me." She didn't speak, but the slight relaxation of her body told me that she believed me, at least for now. And that belief anchored me, giving me the strength to continue, even as every fiber of my being remained alert. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet movement was essential. Standing still would leave us vulnerable, hesitation could mean disaster. We passed an alleyway that cut between two buildings. The shadows were long and deep, and I felt my pulse quicken as I scanned every corner, every dark recess, every subtle movement. The betrayal we had uncovered was deliberate, meticulous, and intimate. It had isolated her, kept her hidden, and exerted control over her life. And now it extended into the streets, into the open world. My mind catalogued every potential threat, every line of sight, every opportunity for observation or interception. I whispered again, soft and deliberate, almost free, just a little more. Her eyes met mine briefly, wide and fearful, yet trusting. That trust, fragile and precious, became the compass guiding our path. Every careful step we took was reinforced by that trust, every cautious movement anchored in the knowledge that I could not fail. And yet, fear remained, lurking in every reflection, every shadow, every sound carried on the city air. As we neared a busier intersection, the city's rhythm grew more pronounced. Cars passing, pedestrians crossing, the distant wail of a siren. The ordinary bustle of life contrasted sharply with the extraordinary danger we had just escaped. My mind catalogued every detail. Who might be observing us, who could recognize us, who could communicate our presence to the orchestrator of this betrayal. Each observation was a calculation, a measure of risk, a step toward survival. I felt the cold steel of responsibility press against me like never before. This was no longer just about moving her safely, it was about anticipating every possible contingency, every hidden hand, every calculated move of someone who had sought to control and terrify. And yet, despite the fear, despite the constant vigilance required, there was a fragile glimmer of hope. We were moving forward, together, and with each careful, deliberate step, we were reclaiming freedom from the shadow of betrayal. Because betrayal, once enacted, never truly stays hidden. It follows, it lingers, and it waits. But trust, fragile, tenuous, and precious, can guide you through even the darkest, most calculated corridors of fear. Every breath we took, every step we made, was a testament to that trust, a defiance of the cruelty that had sought to control her life. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, perilous, and filled with unseen threats, I knew we had already taken the first decisive step toward reclaiming not just freedom, but the power to confront betrayal and ensure that it could harm us no longer. The streetlights flickered as we continued down the avenue, the city now bathed in a mix of shadow and dim illumination. Every movement seemed magnified, every noise exaggerated in the tense silence between the ordinary sounds of the city. My daughter pressed closer, instinctively sensing that the world we had just stepped into was as unpredictable as it was dangerous. I whispered softly, "Stay with me, every step matters," and I felt the tiny rhythm of her heartbeat against my chest, a fragile pulse, delicate yet grounding. Even in this seemingly ordinary environment, the betrayal we had escaped continued to cast its shadow. Every parked car, every reflective window, every alleyway could conceal an observer. Every subtle shift in the flow of pedestrians could be a signal, a message, a prelude to the next phase of danger. My mind catalogued the scene like a chessboard, anticipating possible moves, calculating risks, and preparing contingencies. One misstep, one uncalculated glance, and the careful balance of safety we were clinging to could crumble instantly. I slowed our pace as we approached a narrower street, the buildings pressing close on either side, casting long shadows. The echo of our footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the confined space, and I had to suppress the instinct to run. Haste could betray us. Panic could betray us. Only deliberate, controlled movement would allow us to survive this first stretch outside the building that had once been our prison. I whispered again, low and steady, "Almost there, keep trusting me." Her hands tightened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile bond between us, the trust that had begun to form in the darkness of a hidden room. Every instinct told me to be aware of the smallest details: the tilt of a lamppost, the shadow shifting behind a curtain, the faint reflection of movement in a distant window. The betrayal we had uncovered had been deliberate, precise, and personal. Whoever had hidden her had anticipated discovery, calculated escape, and designed contingencies for each eventuality. And now, those contingencies were active, unfolding in ways that we could not fully predict. I had to remain vigilant, because the true danger might emerge at any moment. We passed a small convenience store, its windows reflecting the dim light and creating illusions of movement. My pulse quickened as I scanned for anomalies, for subtle indicators of observation. Every ordinary detail could conceal a threat. Every reflection could reveal an unseen eye. The weight of responsibility pressed down like a physical force. I was not just protecting her from the immediate threat, but from a betrayal so deep that it had reshaped her world, isolated her, and threatened her very trust in those around her. I whispered once more, my voice soft but firm, "We're almost safe, just a few more steps." Her eyes met mine, wide and fearful, yet trusting. That trust, fragile and tenuous, anchored me, giving me the clarity and focus I needed to move forward despite the fear coiling tight in my chest. Every movement, every choice, was now dictated by a balance of caution and necessity, a delicate navigation of fear, observation, and protection. As we reached a slightly busier street, the hum of the city grew louder, ordinary and indifferent to our peril. Cars passed, people walked past, their lives unaware of the invisible web of betrayal that had sought to manipulate and control ours. Yet every detail was magnified in my perception. Who glanced our way, who appeared deliberately distracted, who moved with purpose. Each observation could signal safety or danger, and I catalogued it all silently, preparing for the possibility that the orchestrator of this nightmare might emerge at any moment. Her grip on my jacket tightened once again, instinctive and urgent. I whispered, "Almost there, stay close," and felt the delicate thread of trust between us solidify, however briefly, into something tangible. Every step forward became a statement, a defiance of the calculated cruelty that had confined her, a reclamation of agency and freedom. And yet, fear remained constant, a shadow stretching across the ordinary world, reminding me that betrayal is rarely confined to a single room or a single moment. It follows, waits, and strikes when least expected. With careful, deliberate movement, I guided her along the street, eyes scanning, mind cataloging, body tense. The ordinary city had transformed into a landscape of uncertainty, each ordinary detail carrying potential meaning. And as we moved forward, I realized that the escape from the hidden room, while monumental, was only the beginning. The confrontation with betrayal, the reckoning with a person who had sought to manipulate her life, and the navigation of the dangerous path ahead would define the next chapter of our journey. Because betrayal does not end in confinement. It lingers in shadows, it follows, it observes. And freedom, even when attained, is measured not only by the distance traveled but by the vigilance maintained, the trust preserved, and the courage summoned to face the truth that waits just beyond the horizon. The city stretched before us, ordinary in appearance yet charged with unseen tension. Every step we took carried the weight of what had happened, and the knowledge that danger was not gone, it had only shifted, adapting to the open world we now navigated. My daughter's small hands clung tightly to my jacket, and I could feel her heartbeat quickening with each new sound, each subtle movement around us. I whispered, low and steady, "Stay close, we're almost through this." Her wide eyes met mine, and in that gaze I sensed both fear and fragile trust, the trust that now anchored every decision I made. The avenue branched into narrower streets, the shadows deepening as the evening light faded. Streetlights flickered, casting intermittent pools of illumination that made ordinary objects appear sinister, alive, almost sentient. My mind catalogued every detail: the tilt of a lamppost, the movement of a delivery van, the reflection of windows along the sidewalk. Each small clue was a potential warning, each anomaly a signal that we might be observed. Whoever had orchestrated this betrayal had planned meticulously, and I could not afford a single lapse in attention. I adjusted my hold on her, pressing her closer as we moved slowly, deliberately forward. "Almost there, just a little more," I whispered. The words were both reassurance and command, a tether between fear and hope. My daughter's fragile trust gave me strength, but it also reminded me how much was at stake. One misstep, one sudden noise, one uncalculated action, and everything could unravel. The psychological weight pressed down like a physical force, and yet I forced myself to maintain absolute calm. Panic, after all, could be far more dangerous than any external threat. We passed a small cluster of parked cars, the shadows between them stretching unnaturally long. My eyes scanned the area, noticing subtle irregularities. A window slightly open, a car door ajar, reflections that didn't quite match the movement of passers-by. Every detail became a potential clue, a measure of threat. I realized that the betrayal we had uncovered was not just an isolated act. It extended into the world, into the environment we had assumed was safe. And now, vigilance was the only path to survival. Her small body shivered slightly and I whispered, "Keep moving, we're almost free." Even in these words, I felt the immense responsibility I bore. The journey to escape had been perilous, but what awaited beyond the immediate danger was equally unknown. The person responsible for hiding her had shown foresight, calculation, and patience. Now the aftermath of that deliberate cruelty loomed over us like a living shadow. Every step we took had to account for unseen eyes, for hidden intentions, for the lingering effects of betrayal. The street narrowed further, lined with buildings whose facades reflected the last light of day. The ordinary rhythm of the city, distant voices, passing cars, footsteps, was distorted in our perception, each sound amplified, each movement scrutinized. I whispered again, low and deliberate, "Almost there, trust me." Her grip on my jacket tightened, and I felt the delicate thread of trust between us strengthen, a lifeline amid the tension. As we approached a slightly busier intersection, the shadows seemed to shift around us, creating fleeting illusions of movement. My instincts told me to slow, to observe, to anticipate every possible scenario. The betrayal we had faced was not a momentary lapse of trust. It had been calculated, intimate, designed to isolate and manipulate. And now, even in the open world, its influence lingered. I had to maintain absolute focus, protecting her while simultaneously reading every detail of the environment. A faint breeze stirred papers on the sidewalk, and a distant siren echoed through the streets. Ordinary elements of the city now carried a dual meaning. They were both benign and potentially threatening. I whispered once more, "Almost free, just a few more steps." Her wide eyes reflected trust and fear, and I felt the fragile bond between us strengthen with every careful movement. Each step became deliberate, a negotiation between survival and exposure, fear and trust, vigilance and hope. I realized then, with a cold clarity, that our escape was more than physical. It was psychological, emotional, and strategic. The betrayal that had confined her was still present, following us invisibly, lingering in the shadows, waiting. But the very act of moving forward, step by careful step, was a defiance of that betrayal, a reclaiming of agency, and a preparation for the confrontation that lay ahead. Because betrayal, once enacted, does not end quietly. It follows. It watches. It waits. And every moment we walked through the streets, every heartbeat, every cautious glance, brought us closer to the reckoning, the confrontation with the orchestrator of the nightmare that had upended our lives. And I knew, in that tense, measured moment, that the most critical steps were still to come. The city around us seemed both familiar and threatening, ordinary yet deceptive. Every sound, the faint rumble of a passing bus, the distant chatter of pedestrians, the clatter of a bicycle bell, was amplified in my perception, each one a potential signal of observation. My daughter's hands clung to my jacket, trembling slightly, and I whispered again, "Stay close, don't look around too much." The words were both caution and reassurance, a delicate balance to keep her calm while maintaining vigilance. We turned down a narrow side street, the buildings closing in around us, shadows pooling along the sidewalks. The ordinary environment felt charged, alive with possibilities of unseen threats. Each parked car, every alleyway, every reflective window became a potential hiding place for whoever had orchestrated this nightmare. My mind catalogued the details instinctively. A faint glint in a window, a door slightly ajar, a shadow moving just beyond the streetlight. The betrayal we had uncovered was deliberate, meticulous, intimate, and it had shaped the world we now navigated. Her small body pressed against mine as we moved cautiously forward. I whispered, low and steady, "Almost there, just a few more steps." Even as I spoke, I could feel the tension in my own body coiling tighter. The responsibility I bore was immense, not just for her safety, but for maintaining the trust that had begun to form in the darkness of that hidden room. One wrong move, one hesitation could unravel everything. We approached an intersection where the street widened slightly, and the city's rhythm changed. Cars passed, their headlights casting fleeting shadows that seemed alive, and distant voices created a cacophony that both masked and revealed potential threats. I scanned every angle, every reflection, every movement, aware that whoever had betrayed us might be observing, waiting for the precise moment to act. The ordinary world had become a labyrinth of deception, and I had to navigate it carefully, deliberately, without revealing fear. Her grip tightened instinctively as we moved past a small cafe, its windows reflecting dim light. I whispered, almost free, "Keep trusting me." Her wide eyes reflected both fear and fragile hope, and in that moment, I realized that her trust was the only thing keeping me grounded. Every step we took reinforced that trust, even as the invisible shadow of betrayal lingered, shaping our perceptions, testing our patience, and threatening to strike if we faltered. We continued along the street, deliberately slow, scanning every corner, every shadow, every reflection. The betrayal we had escaped was not a momentary act. It was calculated, intentional, and deeply personal. And though we had moved into the open, its presence lingered, manifesting as tension, doubt, and the constant anticipation of danger. I whispered again, low and deliberate, "We're almost safe, just a little farther." Her head pressed lightly against my chest, and I felt the fragile bond of trust solidify, even amid fear. As we approached a more populated avenue, the ordinary activity of the city, footsteps, passing cars, distant voices, became both a shield and a potential hazard. Each person might be an observer, each movement might be a signal, each reflection might reveal our position. I catalogued every detail, every possibility, preparing for the confrontation that I knew was inevitable. The betrayal had been deliberate. Now, the reckoning would be as deliberate, as calculated, and as inescapable as the actions that had brought us here. I realized then, with chilling clarity, that this escape was not just about moving through streets. It was a psychological, emotional, and strategic challenge. Each step forward, each careful glance, each whispered reassurance to her was part of a larger plan: to survive, to reclaim control, and to confront the orchestrator of this betrayal. Because betrayal never ends quietly. It follows. It observes. It waits. And the moment you feel safe, truly free, is often the moment it prepares to strike. With every deliberate, cautious step, I reminded myself, vigilance now could mean the difference between safety and exposure, between trust preserved and trust shattered. And though the shadow of betrayal followed us, lingering invisibly in every corner of the city, every careful move we made brought us closer to the point where the truth would finally be confronted, and the nightmare finally challenged. The avenue stretched ahead, seemingly calm, but I knew better. Every flicker of movement, every shadow along the walls, every reflection in a store window could be a sign of observation. My daughter's small hands clung to my jacket as if holding on to both me and the fragile sense of safety we had managed to create. "Keep close, don't let go," I whispered, my voice calm, deliberate, carrying the weight of authority and reassurance. Her trust was fragile, yet in that trust lay the strength we both needed to continue. The city's ordinary rhythm, distant voices, cars passing, the soft hum of neon lights, felt distorted, as though the world itself were aware of the tension we carried. Every sound was amplified, every reflection scrutinized. The betrayal we had escaped in that hidden room was no longer confined to walls or doors. It had spread into the streets, into the air around us, into the very environment we now navigated. Whoever had orchestrated this was patient, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I knew instinctively that the confrontation we feared could come at any second. We passed a narrow alley, dark and silent, and my pulse quickened. My mind catalogued every detail: a trash can slightly out of place, the glint of light on metal, the subtle echo of footsteps from further down the street. Every anomaly was a potential signal, every shift a warning. I whispered again, "Almost there. Stay calm, keep close." Her eyes met mine, wide and trusting, and I felt the delicate thread of confidence that bound us together strengthen with each careful step. As we continued, I became acutely aware of the psychological weight pressing down on both of us. The betrayal had isolated her, manipulated her, and threatened her trust in the people she should have been able to rely on. Now, that manipulation extended beyond walls, beyond rooms, into the open city, into the very streets we thought were safe. My responsibility was immense: to guide her, protect her, and maintain her trust while navigating a world that seemed ordinary but was layered with unseen danger. A faint reflection in a shop window caught my attention, a movement too deliberate to be coincidental. My instincts screamed vigilance, and I slowed, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the orchestrator. I whispered softly, "We're almost safe, just a few more steps." Her grip tightened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of both fear and faith in my presence. That trust, delicate and precious, anchored me even as the tension coiled tighter in my chest. The street widened ahead, lined with buildings whose windows reflected the fading light, creating shifting patterns that both revealed and concealed. Every ordinary detail became part of a puzzle, every movement a potential threat. I reminded myself that the betrayal we had endured had been deliberate, personal, and calculated, and that our survival depended on the same careful calculation, patience, and observation now. With each step, I realized that our journey was as much psychological as physical. Every glance, every whispered word, every cautious movement was part of reclaiming control over a situation designed to strip it away. The betrayal that had hidden her was still present, lingering invisibly, but our careful, deliberate progress was a defiance of that cruelty. I whispered once more, low and deliberate, almost free, just a little farther. Her eyes, wide and trusting, reflected the delicate bond we had forged in the darkness of the hidden room. Every heartbeat, every measured step, brought us closer to confrontation, to truth, and to the point where the nightmare that had consumed our lives could finally be faced. Because betrayal does not end quietly. It lingers, it follows, and it waits. And as we moved cautiously through the streets, every shadow, every reflection, every subtle anomaly reminded me that the reckoning was approaching. And when it came, it would demand vigilance, courage, and the fragile trust we had fought so hard to preserve. The street ahead opened into a larger square, illuminated by scattered streetlights that cast long, uneven shadows across the pavement. Every movement felt magnified, every distant sound amplified, the faint hiss of tires on asphalt, the clatter of a garbage bin in the wind, the soft murmur of voices from a nearby cafe. My daughter pressed closer, and I could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest, her small hands clutching my jacket as if holding on to both me and the fragile sense of safety we had created. I whispered softly, low and steady, almost there, stay close. The ordinary cityscape now felt like a theater of threats, every detail charged with potential danger. Windows reflected shapes that could conceal observers. Alleyways stretched like dark veins, hiding possibilities of ambush. Even the seemingly random patterns of pedestrians walking by became potential indicators of surveillance or warning. My mind catalogued each detail, weighing risk, anticipating movement, and preparing for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. The betrayal that had confined her was still active, still watching, still waiting for the right moment to strike. Her grip on me tightened, instinctively protective, and I whispered again, "We're almost safe, just a few more steps." Her eyes met mine, wide and fearful, yet filled with trust, the fragile trust that had taken root in the darkness of a hidden room, nurtured in every cautious step forward. That trust anchored me, focused me, reminding me that every deliberate choice mattered, that every decision could protect or endanger her. The square was open now, a deceptive sense of freedom spreading out before us. Yet every instinct told me that danger lingered in the edges, in the shadows, in the hidden corners of this seemingly ordinary environment. Betrayal, I realized, is never confined to walls. It follows, observes, and manipulates even in the open world. The person responsible for hiding her had anticipated escape, had calculated every contingency, and perhaps was now observing from somewhere within sight, unseen yet omnipresent. I guided her carefully across the square, our movements slow, deliberate, and synchronized with the rhythm of the environment. Each step was calculated, each glance purposeful. The ordinary city life, the distant chatter of people, the hum of cars, the flickering neon signs, was now a complex map of potential threats, each requiring observation, anticipation, and strategic navigation. I whispered softly, "Almost there, trust me." Her head pressed lightly against my chest, and I felt the bond of trust solidify, fragile but unbreakable. We approached the far edge of the square, where the street widened and the lights were brighter. The sense of relief was palpable, yet tempered by the knowledge that the danger had not fully passed. The betrayal that had orchestrated her confinement, the manipulation that had isolated and terrorized her, had not yet been fully confronted. And I knew with absolute clarity that the reckoning, the confrontation, the exposure of truth, the unmasking of the orchestrator, was only moments away. The final steps were deliberate, tense, and weighted with anticipation. Every shadow, every reflective surface, every subtle movement could signal the arrival of threat or the path to safety. I whispered once more, almost free, just a little farther. Her wide eyes, now reflecting both fear and courage, met mine. The trust we had forged in the darkness, in fear and uncertainty, now became our shield, our guide, and our strength. Because betrayal is never truly hidden. It lingers, it watches, and it waits for the moment of exposure. And as we crossed the threshold of the square, stepping into open light and relative safety, I knew that the journey of survival, of reclaiming trust, and of confronting the orchestrator of this nightmare had only begun. Every breath, every heartbeat, every cautious step carried the weight of fear, courage, and defiance. And with that, the stage was set for the reckoning, the confrontation that would determine whether trust, resilience, and calculated courage could overcome betrayal and restore a sense of safety to a world that had once been corrupted by secrecy and manipulation. The night had settled fully over the city, the shadows stretching long and deep, but the weight of what we had endured lingered like a tangible presence. My daughter rested quietly against me, the tension in her small body slowly easing as we paused to catch our breath. The streets around us were calm, ordinary once again, yet I knew that the echo of betrayal would not fade so easily. It had left its mark, invisible but indelible, in both our lives and our perceptions. I took a slow breath, reflecting on the journey we had taken, from the hidden room where fear and isolation ruled, to the uncertain expanse of the streets, where danger and observation lurked in every corner. The betrayal had been calculated, deliberate, and deeply personal. It had sought to undermine trust, to isolate, to manipulate. Yet in its wake, something unexpected had emerged. A bond forged in fear, strengthened by vigilance, and anchored in the fragile but powerful trust between a parent and child. I looked down at her, the weight of responsibility pressing on me like never before. As a judge, I had spent decades interpreting law, measuring justice, and weighing the consequences of human action. Yet no courtroom could have prepared me for this, the intimate, personal, and deeply psychological confrontation with betrayal in the lives of those I loved. The lessons were stark. Vigilance must be constant, trust must be deliberate, and courage is often measured not by bold action but by careful, calculated steps in the face of fear. Betrayal, I realized, does not merely hide in walls or rooms. It follows. It watches. It waits. It seeks to exploit weakness and magnify fear. And yet, the response to betrayal is equally potent. Awareness, patience, careful observation, and the willingness to act with precision and courage can counteract even the most deliberate acts of deception. Trust, fragile yet resilient, becomes the compass guiding one through darkness and uncertainty, illuminating a path that fear alone cannot obscure. As we moved slowly forward, I whispered softly, "We've come this far, and we will continue." The journey ahead was not yet complete. Confrontation and reckoning awaited, not just with those who had betrayed us, but within ourselves, our capacity to forgive, to strategize, and to reclaim control over lives that had been threatened. Each careful step forward was a choice, a declaration, and a lesson in resilience. In the quiet reflection of that night, I understood something profound. Betrayal can wound, isolate, and terrify, but it can also illuminate strength, reveal courage, and forge bonds that fear cannot sever. And though the path ahead remained uncertain, though shadows still lingered and dangers could re-emerge, the act of moving forward, deliberately, cautiously, and with trust intact, was itself a triumph. Because survival, true survival, is not merely escaping harm. It is recognizing betrayal, confronting fear, safeguarding trust, and reclaiming agency in a world where deceit may wait at every corner. And as I held my daughter close, feeling the quiet steadiness of her presence, I knew that the journey had already begun, that lessons had been learned, and that the story of betrayal and resilience would continue, not in fear but in courage, vigilance, and unwavering trust. In the end, perhaps that is the truest form of justice. Not in punishment alone, not in retaliation, but in reclaiming life, trust, and agency after betrayal has sought to take them away. And as the night enveloped us, I felt a quiet certainty settle over my mind. The journey is long, the path is fraught, but courage, trust, and deliberate action can guide even the most vulnerable through darkness into light.